Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show. I'm Nigel Hannaford, and it is Thursday, December the 18th, and I am speaking today still trying to get my head wrapped around what is happening to Jewish population around the world. Just 4 days ago, there was a savage massacre in Australia, Bondi Beach, the famous Bondi Beach. It's like a massacre happening at the foot of the CN Tower in Toronto. You can't look the other way. 15 people killed because they were Jews, apparently by Islamist terrorists. And I am joined today by Vivian Berkovich, who was appointed Canadian ambassador to Israel in 2014 by Stephen Harper. She lives these days in a kibbutz in Israel, where through her podcasts, her writings, and her television commentaries, she's a tireless advocate for Jewish people everywhere. It is because of that we're talking to her today to try and make some sense of this. Vivian's past guest. Vivian, welcome back to the show.
Pleasure to be here with you, Nigel. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Vivian, it seems a lot longer than 4 days ago. There's been so much else. There seems to be a pattern of random attacks on Jewish people. What is going on?
Well, I think that we are finally seeing the fruits of 2+ years of momentum. The Free Palestine movement, globalize the Intifada, whatever you want to call it. It's a kind of convergence of various political and other interests, the so-called progressives on the extreme left, the Free Palestine folks, the Islamists, the fundamentalist Islamists, so pro-Hamas, pro-ISIS, and there are many out there, and others. And the one thing that they seem to agree on, because they come from very different kind of, philosophies, but the one thing they seem to agree on is that Israel is the most evil state to ever have existed, and it must be annihilated, eradicated, and that all Jews must be killed. When people are screaming on the streets in Toronto, as they have been for 2+ years, globalize the Intifada, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. Our successive prime ministers, so Mark Carney and Trudeau before him, premiers, mayors, law enforcement officials have been telling us for 2+ years that these are peaceful protests with individuals exercising their constitutional rights. It was malarkey on October 7th, and it remains malarkey today. There is nothing peaceful about calling for the annihilation of Israel and the murder of Jews everywhere.
Well,
And
Vivian,
Jews,
if you're going to annihilate Jews, why do it in Australia? That's a long way from Israel.
the Jews, they
Yeah,
just
but
hate Jews.
they're a long way away, isn't there? If it makes sense to attack Jews in Australia, does it make sense to attack Jews in Canada? How
Sure.
anxious are you?
Well, I mean, I used to spend a lot more time in Canada than I do now, and a large part of the reason is because of what it's become since October 7th. How anxious would I be if I was living there? Very. I was in Toronto, my hometown, where I lived over 50 years. I still have a kid there, lots of family and friends. I was there in April, in the lead up to the election, and people were unnerved, but not totally freaked out yet. I was back in September, and it's just Venus and Mars. The Jewish community in September was terrified. Canada has changed a lot since Mark Carney took office, and it shows. And it shows in the statistics, and it shows in the fear. I spent 3 days. I just couldn't even be there. It's a very hard place to be if you're Jewish.
That's an astonishing thing. Many Jews immigrated to Canada over the years because they thought it was a safe place. And I think by and large, for most of the time that I've been in journalism, which goes back 50 years, there was a very strong, almost to the point where people resented it, that there was a very strong influence on public policy by the Canadian Jewish population. Now, obviously, that kind of general acceptance is not helping Jews in Canada today. Let me ask you a very direct, blunt question. Do you think there's going to be a nasty incident like this in Canada soon?
So I'll answer it this way. I think that there, but for the grace of God. So we're just lucky that it hasn't happened yet.
Good
That's what
heavens. Well, it's happening in other places and on a smaller scale. It seems like hardly a week goes by uh, that there isn't a report of a murder where the obvious conclusion can only be that it was an anti Semitic hit. You mentioned, I think, some attacks in the United States. There was a couple of university. Well, just tell us what is going on, and then I want you to tell: is this random or is it an informal strategy to intimidate Jews wherever they live?
It's not random. In terms of since Bondi, as best I can recall, sort of off the top of my head, there was a shooting on campus at Brown University. It was a kind of pre-exam tutorial. I believe that the expectation of the shooter was probably that the Jewish professor who runs that course was going to be attending and giving the seminar or the tutorial. The Jewish professor was not there. A few days later, a Jewish professor at MIT, a physicist, originally from Portugal, but been in America for many years, 47 years old, young children, young family. Someone broke into his apartment in Brookline, Massachusetts, and murdered him. Apparently, he is known for being pro-Israel, and he's openly Jewish. There was a man in the last few days on the streets of Brooklyn, attacked, a visibly Jewish man, sort of wearing Orthodox Jewish clothing, and he was attacked and stabbed within an inch of his life, I believe. And those are just a few that kind of pop into my head. But even more concerning, Nigel, is the fact that within hours at Bondi, there were people coming out and celebrating what had happened there. Within hours of Bondi in Toronto, at the corner of Bathurst and Shepherd, a major intersection in the north end of the city that's got a lot of Jewish residents, there was a Hanukkah lighting, just like there had been at Bondi. There was a public Hanukkah menorah lighting at an intersection in Toronto. And for 2+ years now, every week, every Sunday, the Islamists, the Free Palestine crowd, have come to that intersection to harass Jews who are not doing anything illegal, who are not threatening them. They're standing there to demonstrate their support for Israel. They have harassed them relentlessly, but they also go to the shops where they know Jews are shopping or that are Jewish owned. And in the last 6-8 months, they've taken to parading through the residential streets, quiet residential streets, and harassing Jewish families outside their homes, saying the most horrific things in front of children. And do you know what the police do? Nothing. Do you know what the police did on Sunday after Bondi? Nothing, but worse than nothing. There was a man who was standing at the corner of Bathurst and Shepherd. He's well known. And he's an Islamist Free Palestine activist. He had a loudspeaker and a microphone, and he was singing at length in Arabic. I have a translation of the lyrics he was singing, and it glorifies attacking and murdering Jews in the name of Allah. This went on and on and on. The police are standing there protecting this. And when they later parade into the Jewish neighborhoods, the police tell the Jews, be quiet, be nice to them, let them pass, clear the sidewalk from them. Sorry, clear the sidewalk for them. This is insanity. And
This individual singing the kind of song that that sounds like hate speech set to music.
one would think.
And yet nothing. Vivian, I don't understand the government responses. 5 minutes after the Bondi shooting, the Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Albanese, starts talking about the need for stronger gun laws and clamping down on right-wing extremists. Well, no. The problem at Bondi wasn't the availability of guns. It was the availability of radical Islamists. Where they can't get guns, they just drive the car into a crowd, or you describe people with knife attacks and so forth. Now, it seems what you have just said about the response in Toronto, that they stood by, they knew this was hate speech, they didn't intervene, they don't actually divert these demonstrations away from the Jewish neighborhoods. Why, in your view, what is it that our leaders are deliberately not joining the dots because they'd rather not admit there's a problem? What do you think is the bigger picture here?
So, first of all, I want to just point out, in addition to what you commented on with respect to Prime Minister Albanese, he has, as have so many of us, including me in my column that I wrote that day for the National Post, he has lauded the heroism of Ahmed al Ahmed. He is a Muslim man, originally from Syria, I believe, and unarmed, he went and tackled one of the gunmen, took him down and grabbed his gun, and he was later shot. And he's quite badly wounded and in hospital. The man's a hero. He also had police training, which came out in the ensuing days. Mr. Al Ahmed, was visited by Prime Minister Albanese in hospital. The Prime Minister did not visit any of the Jewish victims in hospital. The Prime Minister has not gone to any of the Jewish funerals that have been held today and yesterday, including the funeral for 10-year-old Matilda, who was gunned down. She was stalked. Her parents watched as she was stalked by one of the gunmen. Her execution has horrified people around the world. Prime Minister Albanese did not go to her funeral. There are two Jewish people, an elderly couple, well, elderly, a little older than me, who tried to tackle one of the gunmen before he even got going. And this was captured on video. And they were murdered. They were heroes.
Yes.
A couple in their 60s. And Albanese has not mentioned them. Do you know what else he hasn't mentioned? As you said, he hasn't mentioned Islamism. He hasn't mentioned Islamist terror. And the another thing that we know about the two men, the father and son team, who went to shoot Jews at Bondi Beach on Sunday, is that they were both training with an ISIS cell in the Philippines 1 month ago.
So, what do you think explains this very selective response that the Australian Prime Minister has offered here?
Well, there are two options, Nigel. One is that he simply doesn't understand what's going on. And the other is that he chooses not to act. And why would he choose not to act? I have never accepted this kind of, facile, offensive, oh, it's about votes. There are more Muslims in these countries than Jews. This isn't about Jews. We're the first target. We always are. But we're not the last. This is about Western civilization. They hate Western civilization. They hate our freedoms and our values. But they can target the Jews for a whole bunch of reasons. And, nobody seems to care. I don't know. Ask Mark Carney to explain his rather breezy attitude, because it's the same as Albanese's, in fact, worse. Albanese has made expressions of support for the Jewish community in Australia over the past 2 years that have never passed Mark Carney's lips. So is it rank anti-Semitism? Is it, the brown shirts of the 20s and 30s in Germany, but in better cut suits? You tell me.
I don't even want to speculate about that. The whole idea is horrifying. What I would, if it is the brown suits and better cut suits, it's not conservative brown suits. Somehow or other, this always ends up, and Mr. Albanese is guilty of this. He was talking about the need to go after right-wing extremists. This is in the same speech that he didn't identify that he identified guns as the problem. If you admit there's a problem, you have to deal with it. Do you think that's a part of what's going on here? They don't have the stomach to actually take a position on Islam, as it call it out for what it is, danger to Western democracy.
I think that our political kind of leadership has become so dumb and so puerile, that are they afraid to call it out? I don't know. I don't understand the fear to call out something that is clearly such a direct and existential threat to right now Jewish citizens, but tomorrow to everybody. What it does is it puts many Western political leaders and leaders of institutions like the chief of police in Toronto, Myron Demke, it puts them in the position of having to look at their kind of guiding, their lodestar, their guiding ideology, which is DEI, right? Diversity is our strength. We're so inclusive, which is kind of all they seem to pay attention to. And this clashes with that. This they can't start, challenging Islamists just because they're Muslim or, extreme progressives just because they're whatever. This is an ideological war. And maybe people have difficulty accepting that their ideology is a load of hooey,
Well,
but
maybe
yeah,
yeah.
is.
This is like cognitive dissonance. You have an idea of how your society is and ought to be, and it's inclusive. You mentioned DEI. Well, there's the I part of it, the inclusivity, and we can do better than we've done in the past. Lots of different people who think different things, and they all get along peacefully and they get along well. Well, then you get in. Now you have the dissonance. You would accept a group of people who come in. They don't buy into that. They don't expect that. So are we onto something here in terms of understanding?
Maybe. I mean, look, Nigel, the police in Toronto, they have decided from the get-go that their approach, and Myron Demke has made these comments in many a closed room over the last 2+ years. And he says, my approach to policing is to keep the peace. And it seems that his idea of keeping the peace is to detain more Jewish people. His force has arrested and detained far more Jewish people who are in their neighborhoods, who express some kind of, or who even just stand there. Why? They've said this repeatedly. It's for your own safety. It's for your own good. They have told Jewish people in the neighborhood that is constantly being, attacked. They have told them, don't say anything. Be nice to these people. So, I mean, this is kind of, they're going out of their way. And I have been at demonstrations in Toronto, and I've had police officers come up to me. There was one in particular in March, and I was standing there. I was not wearing anything visibly Jewish. I didn't have a keffiyeh. Like, I was just a person. But they looked at me, and I guess they decided that since I didn't have a keffiyeh and wasn't carrying a sign saying destroy Israel, that I was with the Jews. And a police officer came up to me and said, go stand over there, in this little penned off little area of a sidewalk. And I said, why? He said, well, you're with them. I said, who are they? And, he was kind of like a little uncertain about how to answer me. I said, I'm not going to stand there. I can go wherever I want. And I proceeded to walk right into the demonstrators. Now, what he was saying to me and what he said to me was, it's for your own protection. What Jewish people have been told many, many times over the last 2+ years in Toronto is, you shouldn't be here. Your presence provokes them. A Jewish woman standing in her driveway in the neighborhood at Bathurst and Shepherd about a month ago was told, you're instigating them. You shouldn't be. Like, this is crazy. So this is not just about DEI, but they're trying to turn the Jewish people into somehow having caused the problem. And there have been many comments made to that effect about what happened at Bondi in Australia.
How were they causing a problem in the opinion of those who think they did by assembling on a beach?
By existing, John,
Yeah.
Nigel. By existing, Nigel. That's the issue.
Vivian, we don't have an awful lot of time left, but I would like you to tell me your honest thoughts about, should Canadian Jews think about finding a safer country to live in? Is it got to that stage? What would you tell your kids?
One of my kids is in Israel with me. The other one is in Toronto. Both my kids are in the kind of late 20s, early 30s snack bracket. They are proud Jewish women. And my older daughter is going to be leaving for a whole bunch of reasons. She works in an environment, it's a public sector environment that is very hostile, openly hostile. It comes up everywhere all the time. You may have heard recently that, there have been a rash of incidents over the years with Jewish people in Ubers, and the drivers have been either thrown them out or said very unkind and inappropriate things if they think the person is Jewish or if they hear them speaking Hebrew. When I'm in Toronto, I can't use Uber because I have a cell phone with an Israeli area code. So they know. I'm not safe in Europe or in Toronto to use Uber. So what would I tell people? I'm not going to say stay or go. But what I do say in my columns and on my podcast, and I'll say here, is open your eyes. Look at what's going on. It's real. It's not getting better. There is zero political will to actually deal with this and address it. There is zero will on the part of law enforcement to deal with this in a remotely appropriate way. And frankly, Nigel, based on what I've seen and what we saw in Australia the other day, I got to question whether or not our police, and I think this is way beyond municipal police now. This is a national security crisis. I don't know that they have the capability to deal with this. We watched the Australian police duck for cover while watching people mowed down by these two men. They ducked for cover. For 15 minutes, these two men shot freely. The police have not explained how and why that happened. Do the police in Toronto even have the ability to deal with an attack of that nature? Never mind the political will or the institutional will. Does the RCMP? Like, who has the ability to deal with counterterror? And you have to be able to mobilize within minutes.
To ask the question is to imply the answer. Are you saying that you don't think the police have the ability? Never mind the will.
I question.
Okay.
I've not seen them demonstrate that. There have been many violent attacks on Jewish institutions and on Jewish people. Many. And one of the things that that needs to be understood here is that the similarities between Sydney and Toronto are incredible in terms of the demographics of the Jewish community. Sydney has about 50,000 Jews. Toronto is more like 200,000 plus. Both communities are kind of very heavy with Holocaust survivors and their families. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. They're vulnerable in different ways. They're not as voluble as their counterparts in America. You mentioned earlier that, Jews have often been very influential and involved in public policy in Canada. I would actually take a different perspective on that, very different perspective on that. I think we've been less involved in Canada as a group than in most Western democracies. But if that's the perception, that's the perception. But I think that the similarities between the two cities is astonishing. The level of violence against Jews in Toronto, statistically, and the kinds of violence has exceeded what the community in Sydney has experienced.
Really?
Yes.
Last question, Vivian. Do you feel safer in Israel than in Toronto?
I'm not safe in Toronto. Yes, I feel much safer here.
Very good. Vivian, thank you for coming on to talk about these. It's terrible. It's a terrible situation. I heard somebody the other day say it's 1938 all over again. Maybe that's maybe it's 1937. It's going in the wrong direction. But I want to thank you for joining us today. And for the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.